Alice Schneider. Want to go back?
I don't see Alice Schneider in your contacts. To who?
Alice Schneider.
I don't see Alice Schneider in your contacts.
For God's
To
sake. And want to go out? No.
Everyone, we're almost ready to get started. We have to turn off the heat blower because it's so loud. There we go. Can you all hear me on Zoom?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, Susan.
Hi, how are you, Samantha?
I'm hanging in there.
Oh, boy, that's about all we can all do right now, huh?
Yep. See if I can make this screen a little bigger. No one's gonna sit in the seat anyways, unfortunately. They're all afraid of me. I took a shower this morning, everyone.
Well, we can see the give me your tired, you're poor.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Gonna give it a couple minutes as people get settled. Check something real quick. Whoop. That's what I wanted. The there, I got rid of that little thing at the bottom. Hi everyone. Hello. Hello.
Hey.
We'll give maybe like 2 more minutes before we start. You think that's okay, Bill? All right. The heat from the projector's keeping me plenty warm. It's blowing right in my face. Well, hello.
Try to balance out the crowd.
Yeah. Well, see, my strategy is to put the cushy chairs at the front. So that way you get rewarded if you sit closer.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Psychology.
Let's go. Big crowd
On Zoom.
Yeah.
I know a lot of these people.
You do.
I sure do.
You've spoken at the Women's City Club before. We have a few from Women's City Club, and some from Cincinnati. And then, oh, there's HA. Yeah.
Well, Bill, I have an actual microphone if you want to use it, but this is the microphone that Zoom is hearing from. So they should hear you okay whenever you want to start.
Got a good Zoom group.
Yep, got a few more coming through the door. That's awesome.
They look
Yeah.
good.
Solo too.
I know. Usually all my meetings, I start them 10 minutes late
Yeah,
because
usually that's a wise thing to do.
especially if it's a new location and people aren't familiar with it. Yeah.
We've got 16 on Zoom now.
Wonderful.
That's gonna need their parking validated.
Oh, yeah. Do the Zoom people need your parking validated?
Nope. Nothing out there.
Yeah.
Okay. They say it's warming up.
26, we're gonna have to, oh my gosh.
Let's go swimming.
I didn't even hear a ring. Nothing out there. But I gotta get back on this call. Yes.
Almost ready to get started, everyone. Thank you for your patience.
I'm sorry, I'm saying this time before.
Brennan, no D. Make this presentation. Yes, we will bring Did she? Okay, this will be good. You came to the right place.
You sure did.
Oh, this here or whatever.
Still outside.
Should we get started, Bill, do you think? Okay, just because I anticipate a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's true.
Yes.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to the first Community Issues Forum for Christ Church Cathedral for 2025. I'm Bill Woods. Ed Burdell and I worked with the committee to put these forums on for Christ Church Cathedral. We thought this was a very timely way to get started in that, and we're pleased to have it at Peasley Neighborhood Center because it's a partner of our that we've worked with over the years. We've had forums here before. We thought particularly since Unite Peace has its headquarters here, this would be a good place to start. Plus, we were unsure what the weather was going to be, so this was a better place for people to come. So today, of course, we've been hearing a lot about the new administration in Washington and what they plan to do. And we're lucky enough to have a coalition here that Samantha Searles, who is the program director for Unite Peace, has been working with and organizing. She's going to tell us how we can get involved and what's happening with that coalition. They had a big meeting last night. So it's a good place to begin this forum series this year with a lot of activity coming out of the new administration that was going to need some protection from. So without any further ado, let me introduce Samantha Searles, and she'll fill us in on what's happening locally.
Yes, thank you so much.
No, stop it.
For those of you on Zoom, please remember to mute because the whole room can hear you, just so you know. And for those of you in the room, thanks for being here. My name is Samantha Searles. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the honor of being a program director at Ignite Peace, formerly known as IJPC, the Intercommunity Justice and Peace Center. We renamed ourselves a couple of years ago. And so welcome to Peasley. And for those of you on Zoom, I hope you visit Peasley at some point because it's a pretty historical part of our community. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Ignite Peace is doing related to immigration. Then we're going to talk about the different ways that the Trump administration is changing policies and what some of those changes are. And then at the end, I'm going to give you a plethora of ways to plug into the movement because there's a lot happening and we need a lot of help. So to begin, I want to start with Ignite Peace. Our mission is to educate and advocate for peace, to challenge unjust systems, and to promote the creation of a nonviolent society. So what that means is we're the peace and justice people, and we talk about peace and justice issues and then plug people in to ways that they can affect change. Specifically, we approach this work through a framework of nonviolence. And so we teach people about using nonviolence as a way of life, but also as a tool for social change. And then as we teach people about nonviolence, we want to plug people into our issue areas, which focus on anti-racism and criminal justice, as well as immigration justice. So we do a little bit of everything. Specifically, education-wise, we do interactive events, presentations, and discussions. This is one of them. You'll see in these pictures on the left-hand side, there's a group playing a board game. We do something called Immigration 101, where we have an interactive board game that kind of douses you in immigration knowledge about how the system works. And so there's actually going to be an Immigration 101 open to the public next Thursday, the 30th. I believe from 6 to 7:30. I need to check my calendar. But it's going to be here at the Peasley Neighborhood Center at the room down the hall. Yes, it's 6 to 7:30 next Thursday. If you are interested about what you learned today and really want to have a deeper grasp, you're welcome to come to that. And then the other picture is one of our previous interns at a tabling event at the Freedom Center, where we asked people about what home should feel like. The second bucket area is advocacy. So we do talk to our legislators. As a 501c3, we are allowed to engage our legislators about these issues as long as we track how many hours we spend in lobbying. So we do direct lobbying, talking directly to legislators, but we also do grassroots lobbying, which is getting other people to talk to their legislators. And we've been known to throw a rally, a protest, or a vigil or two. I need to dust off my safety jackets because I'm feeling we're going to be doing a lot of those in the next 4 years. So the pictures on this screen are the three of us in front of City Hall, me and a couple of interns. We spoke at City Council about affordable housing and how that specifically affects the immigrant community. And on the other side is one of the many protests that happened in the summer of 2018 or 2019, I believe it was. And you can see Muse Women's Choir in the background with one of our immigration leaders, Sandra, speaking in front of them. And then the other bit that we do is coalition building, because I recognize that I personally am a white woman who was born in the United States and speaks English, and yet I run an immigration justice program. So in order to do my work authentically, it's important to be in coalition with those who are directly affected by our unjust immigration laws. Specifically, we do that through a group called the Immigrant Dignity Coalition. And here's a couple of pictures from our meetings. I actually really need to update these pictures because we have ballooned in size. But on the left is a picture of a meeting pre-pandemic that was at the Clifton Mosque. And on the right is one of our smaller meetings that we've had at Mount Auburn Presbyterian Church. The coalition has since grown to 50 member organizations. And we have two tiers of membership. One is full voting members. And so they are the organizations in town that are really in the thick of it and have committed to sending someone from their group to every coalition meeting. And in exchange, they get the power to vote on coalition issues. But then we have about 25 or so supporting groups. So it's about half and half. That support the mission, but may not have the time to put into the work. And so I encourage you, if you're a part of a church, a faith community, any other civic group or nonprofit organization, to join the coalition if it's an issue that affects your people. Specifically, the mission of the coalition is to inform, connect, and mobilize. So we inform each other about what's going on. Specifically, we've been talking about how federal policy is affecting us locally. Then we connect with each other to solve problems and to get ourselves ready for all of this immigration enforcement that's been talked about. And then we mobilize for action and systemic change. So we want to push back against these bad policies and let our elected officials know that we won't stand for it. The coalition meets on the fourth Wednesday of the month. Sometimes it changes depending on what month it is, but majority of the year it's the fourth Wednesday, which was yesterday, which was last night. So last night the coalition met. I think there were about 100 people there, both in person and online combined. And we meet at Mount Auburn Presbyterian Church, but there is a Zoom option. And we also offer simultaneous interpretation into Spanish and French, so that way the immigrant community itself can participate. Before I jump into the issue and what's been going on, does anybody have any questions about Ignite Peace or the Immigrant Dignity Coalition? And if you're on Zoom, it's probably helpful just to unmute and speak up because I can't see everybody's faces when I'm screen sharing. Cool. I'll assume that means I did a good job. But later, feel free to ask any questions you have. So before we talk about changes, I think it's really important for people to understand how the system is supposed to work, how the system is set up. So this is, if you come next week to the Immigration 101, we will dive deeper into all of these terms, but I kind of want to show you this map that really illustrates how the process works. So at the top of the path to citizenship is citizenship, right? Citizens have lots of rights and protections, and so a lot of people want to become US citizens. Can anybody either on Zoom or in the room tell me what some of those rights and protections are that citizens have? Covered by the Constitution? Yeah, yeah. Allowed to vote? Free speech. There's a lot of different, there's a lot of things in the Constitution that apply to everyone who's on our soil. But there are specific things that are reserved for citizens, like the ability to vote, and also government programs. So if you fall on hard times, US citizens have access to food assistance and housing assistance, healthcare, you know, the social safety net is made for US citizens. Yeah. So people become citizens in two ways. You're either born on US soil, which is how I got citizenship. I was born in Columbus. And that also means if you're in a military base abroad and you're born in that military base, you also get citizenship. Or you go through a process called naturalization. And those are for folks that were not born in the United States to become citizens. We have two programs that we use to welcome immigrants into our community. They are green cards and visas. And I want to see, can you venture a guess, or do you know what the difference is between a green card and a visa?
Time limited.
Visa is time limited. Thanks. That's the biggest difference. Both of them let you work. Yeah. So green cards are folks with green cards are often called LPR, lawful permanent residents. So the word permanent is key there. And so the idea is that folks who have green cards are here to live permanently. You can get a green card through family or through work. And there's actually a lottery for countries that don't have a lot of immigrants in the United States. So you could actually win a green card, which is wild to me. But visas are given to folks who are here for a specific reason and for a specific amount of time. Now, there's two kinds of visas. There's immigrant visas and non-immigrant visas. Immigrant visas are for folks who plan to stay here permanently, but perhaps didn't qualify for a green card, or perhaps are here for a job that could turn permanent eventually. But then there's also non-immigrant visas like tourist visas, people who go to Disney World, who are here just for a limited amount of time and they plan to leave and go back to their home countries. Now, I put both of them on these path to citizenship, but for a couple of different reasons. When people come to the United States, you have to have a green card first. You can't just go through the naturalization process and become a citizen. You can't just walk in and become a citizen. You have to have a green card first. Depending on your situation, people have green cards for about 3 to 5 years before they can start the process. However, there are people that live their whole lives on green cards. Perhaps that they feel loyal to their home country and don't want to take the oath to be a citizen. There's lots of reasons why people stay living on the green cards their whole lives, but they do have access to the naturalization process. And then for visas, let's say there's a student who comes to study here and they have a student visa and they have an internship, and the organization or the business that they're interning at wants to offer them a job after graduation, then that business can help them adjust their status from visa to green card. So not saying having a visa guarantees you a green card, but it does set you up for success in many situations. There's all kinds of exceptions to everything I'm saying right now, but this is the basics. Now let me go through a couple more and then I'll stop for questions because I know this is a lot of information. Then we have 2 programs for immigrants who are fleeing danger and can no longer stay in their home countries. And that's the refugee program and the asylum program. Does anybody want to venture a guess what the difference is between those 2 programs? This is where it gets hard. Okay, so there's 2 main differences. One is who runs the program. So the refugee program is ran by the United Nations. And so they keep tabs of conflicts around the globe and then send their people to those conflict areas and set up refugee camps ready to receive the people who are fleeing violence. Many refugees live their whole lives in refugee camps. Only 1%, I think that's the statistic, only 1% is resettled to another country, and that's when they come to the United States. So at those refugee camps is where they get screened and get their protected humanitarian status as a refugee. Whereas the asylum programs are ran by individual countries, and not every country has one. Those individual countries can set the rules on how you get asylum. And those rules are always changing, and they've changed in the last 2 days. The asylum program, the way it works is a person in danger can come to the United States and claim asylum, saying that they're afraid for their lives, and start a process called asylum that is a legal process. It is a legal right to ask for protections through the asylum program. The way it used to work was that people would come to the border, for example, talk to a border officer who would then see if they have a credible fear. And if they did, they would be released into the country to go live with maybe extended family or to settle down someplace and have access to work permits, because the asylum process takes a long time. And then eventually they'd have a court hearing and they would decide if they get asylum status. And if they do, they would get a green card. Now, I hate to burst your bubble, but our immigration court is located in Cleveland, and they do not have a very high approval rate for asylum cases. So many people either stuck in the waiting list or wait a long time and don't end up getting asylum. But if you have a refugee status or asylum status, you get a green card, and therefore you're on the path to citizenship. I wanna go through two more bits, and then we can stop for questions. The next bit is this cloud that's kind of over here to the side, and this is the undocumented community. So at Ignite Peace, we use the phrase undocumented because it explains the situation that they're in, plain and simple. Undocumented, they don't have immigration papers. That means they don't have a visa. That means they don't have a green card. They don't qualify to be a refugee or an asylum seeker. And so plain and simple, that's why we use that phrase. The other phrase that is often used to describe this group of people is illegal immigrants. We don't use that for two reasons. One, that word has been weaponized to dehumanize this vulnerable group of people. But two, from an educational standpoint, it kind of muddies the water. Now, I won't get too nerdy on you because I can be really nerdy. But immigration law, most immigration laws are civil code, civil legal code, and not criminal code. And so by calling someone illegal, it sounds like they're a criminal. So technically speaking, that's not what's happening. People become undocumented for many reasons. One is that they had papers and they lost it. Perhaps their visa expired. Perhaps they didn't know they had to reapply for a visa or didn't have money to reapply for a visa or legal help. Or perhaps they committed some crimes and lost and were no longer eligible for their visa. But also, people become undocumented because they enter without papers in the first place. Sometimes we call that enter without authorization. Or without entering without permission. And the reason why families do that, there's lots of reasons, is perhaps they don't qualify for a visa or a green card. I mentioned earlier that most of these things are tied to family and work. So if you don't have a job lined up, or if you don't have family with status already here, it is very hard to get a visa as a poor person that doesn't have ties to the US. So there's lots of reasons why a family may choose to enter without permission. The reason why they're in this little cloud over here is because there is not a path to citizenship for them. Once you're here as an undocumented person, there's not like a general process of applying for a green card or a visa. You have to be outside the United States in order to do that. Now, like I said, this is an overview, so there are exceptions to every rule, right? One of the exceptions is, let's say an undocumented person is a victim of a heinous crime and law enforcement wants to investigate this crime. Well, law enforcement can sponsor a special visa for that immigrant called a victim's visa or a U visa. And that way the immigrant feels a little bit more secure in cooperating with the investigation. But then now they have a visa and they could be on the path to citizenship. So something terrible has to happen to you in order to get papers if you're already here in the United States. It is also possible through marriage to a US citizen, but it is very complicated. Often the undocumented spouse has to leave the country while the US spouse fills out the paperwork. And sometimes the undocumented spouse could be barred from coming back depending on their immigration status history. So it's very complicated, but essentially there is not a mainstream way for undocumented people to get papers if they're already here. The last thing I want to mention before we take questions is this smaller cloud down here, also in the slide, says other programs. So we know our Congress is not very efficient. And while there are flaws with our immigration system, they haven't historically been good at fixing them. So what they do is they piecemeal programs together to solve problems as they pop up. One of those programs is called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Some of you have heard this before because DACA recipients are often called Dreamers, because the DREAM Act is the piece of legislation that would help them. But DACA is a program for undocumented immigrants who came here when they were little and they were undocumented. The logic is because they came to the United States when they were children, it would not make sense to deport them when they hit 20 and 30 years old because they've been here their whole lives, right? So DACA is a work permit and protection against deportation. The program is not currently open, so it is a specifically defined group of people that are now in their 20s and 30s. So that's DACA. TPS is a program called Temporary Protected Status, and it is country by country. If you are an undocumented person that's here, and let's say an earthquake happens in your home country, the government might create a TPS program for you. Because the logic is, if the government deported you back to your home country, the infrastructure is just not there to support you. Like it's a mess, or you could be in danger. And so countries like Haiti have programs called TPS. If you've been following what's been happening in Springfield, a lot of those folks have TPS because of everything that's been happening in Haiti. But other countries like Venezuela, Ukraine, Afghanistan also have TPS programs. Lastly is a program called SIJS, Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. And this is for undocumented youth who come by themselves. The government that views a person who comes by themselves as abandoned by their family. And so the government then takes responsibility for the minor child, and they do get protection and work permits once they come of age. And that program's a little unique because sometimes there is ways for them to get access to green cards and visas. But they're in this little cloud over here because they're not quite undocumented, but they're not on the path to citizenship either. So I know I just threw a bunch of information at you. When I do the Immigration 101s, we take a lot more time and dive in way deeper. So I want to open it to questions, but I want you to keep in mind the reason you're here today is to learn about the Trump administration, and our time has half passed. So I want to start with Zoom first. Are there any questions from folks on Zoom? I saw the chat about the slides, getting access to the slides later. This program is actually being recorded. And so that recording will be available from Christ Church Cathedral and the Community Issues Forum. It goes on YouTube, right?
It goes on our website.
It goes on your website.
There. It's there and there.
Yes. You are all welcome to also email me, and I'm happy to send you the slides. For those of you in the room, there's actually hard copies back on the table if you want to take them with you, or if you want to grab one now to take notes, you're welcome to do so. Anybody on Zoom have any questions about everything I just threw at you?
Nope, it was well done.
All right, here in the room, questions about how the programs are supposed to work? Yes.
Yes, the other night they went through the history of immigration, and one point that struck me was it would have been years ago where they allowed families, and if somebody was already here, they allowed families to come in. Is that still in effect, or has that been done yet?
There is a way to sponsor your family members to come. It's complicated and it depends on your situation, but it is possible. Yes. Let me check the chat. Yes, I can repeat the question. The question was, can people sponsor their family members? Okay, I'm gonna take off my sweater because the heat from this projector is making me perspire. All right, let's dive into what is going on now. And before we do that, I'm gonna give you a little civics reminder. So we have 3 branches of government in the United States, in theory, the legislative, executive, and judicial. Each of them have decision-making bodies and different responsibilities. The legislative branch, of course, is ran by Congress, and Congress's job is to pass laws and to pass the budget. Right now, there is one party in charge of both houses of Congress, and so we are going to see a lot of legislation coming from them. In fact, just yesterday or the day before, they passed a law called the Laken-Riley Act, which allows police officers to basically detain anyone that looks like an immigrant and put them in immigration detention with no bond. So what this means is usually when you are accused of a crime, you get arrested, you have an arraignment, or you go, there's due process. There's a process to prove that you committed a crime. This act kind of wipes that all away, and immigrants can be put into jail without a chance of a bond for superfluous reasons and for superfluous crimes like shoplifting. Yes. It does empower local police to do it as well. Yes. So lots of bad laws coming from Congress soon. We are going to talk about sanctuary cities in a little bit. So let's move to the executive branch. This is where a lot of action has happened. The executive branch is made up of the president and his cabinet, which also includes federal agencies. The executive branch is in charge of interpreting the laws passed by Congress. So they do all the rules and regulations. There is a way to push back against some of these. A lot of the executive orders and a lot of new policies coming from the executive branch are subjected to a process called federal rulemaking, which is where these agencies reach out to the public and try to get experts in the issue area to ask the public, are we interpreting the law in the way that you think we should? So there are ways of submitting public comments to new policies. So a lot of the immigration advocacy groups will put out calls to say, submit a comment. If you hear that language, that's what that's about. It's about submitting a comment to give your opinion on a new policy from the executive branch. We did that during the first Trump administration. There was a policy called public charge, which has to do with immigrants using public benefits. Some immigrants with green cards do qualify for some public benefits, but the public charge said that would make you look bad if you then tried to start the naturalization process. And so we pushed back against that and said, you know, healthcare is so critical. If you pass this law, people aren't going to get healthcare and they're going to get sick and die. So this is bad policy. And we were successful in delaying the implementation of that rule until it got to the court system and the courts stopped it. So submitting public comments is a strategy to delay the implementation of bad policies. And then the last branch, of course, is the judicial branch, where the Supreme Court and district courts are. They are going to be very busy because there's a lot of private groups, private organizations that are suing the Trump administration on some of their policy proposals, saying that it doesn't follow the law, it doesn't follow the Constitution. So there's going to be a lot happening with lawsuits and in the court systems that's going to determine immigration policy. Right now, the DACA program is, there was a decision last Friday from one of the district courts that the program was unlawful and not following immigration laws, and that President Biden didn't have the power to create it. President Obama created it, but it's a complicated story. And so advocates are now appealing that, and it'll go to the Supreme Court, probably heard next year, and DACA will probably end. So for those young people who have had this protection for the past few years, they will then become undocumented when the program ends. Any questions on this slide before I get to specific things that have happened this week?
Do you think that enough pushback by the public would help that DACA ruling being overturned?
Unfortunately, no, because it's in the court's hands. However, Congress can always solve these problems, right? Congress can write DACA into law. Congress can create a path to citizenship for people with DACA. Politically, I don't think that'll happen unless it's part of a negotiation deal. Like if there's a big immigration bill, say they want to send more money to build the wall, they could add like an amendment in there that protects DACA recipients to try to get more people on the other side of the aisle to vote for that bill. But a lot of DACA recipients don't want that. They don't want to put other people at risk just so they can be protected. So it really is a hard situation for DACA recipients. I am on the lookout for guidance from national groups on what the strategy is for DACA. But right now we're telling people to renew their status because even if the program does end, your permit will still be valid until it expires, likely.
Thank you.
The question in the room was, do we know how many DACA people there are? At one point, I believe the number was 11 million, or is that 11 million undocumented? Maybe it's 500,000. That sounds better. About 500,000 DACA recipients. Yeah. I'm not good with numbers. I'm good with stories, just to be honest. Any other questions from Zoom about how the three branches of government are gonna make things hard? One thing I do want to mention is we don't just have to worry about what's coming from DC. We also need to worry about what's coming from Columbus. The State House has introduced some anti-immigrant legislation last session, and we expect it to come back because also both chambers are ran by one party. And because of the political nature and the hot topic of immigration, we do expect some attacks coming from Columbus as well. And city-wise, this immigration is a federal issue, but cities have passed policies that have made it either easier or harder for the federal officials to do their job. So I am, we won't get into it just now, but I am very anxious to hear what our local elected officials are going to do to protect the immigrants that are already here. Let's talk about things that have happened in the last 48 hours. or it's been a little bit more than that. It's been a hard week, everyone. So one of the things that changed is the sensitive location policy has went away. So what that means is ICE, which is the Immigration Enforcement Police, used to be barred from going into sensitive places like churches, schools, hospitals, and courthouses. And there's a couple of other examples. That policy has since went away. So what that means is if a church is open to the public, it's open to ICE, and ICE can come in there and ask questions, poke around, and try to get people to admit that they're here without papers. Schools is a little bit different because like the general public isn't welcome to go into a school. However, like the front lobby could count as a public space. But courthouses are public spaces. And so now ICE can go into courthouses. One thing that you can do to push back is to be clear if you have a public space. I would say Peaslee is a public space. To label what parts of that space are private and are by invitation only. So for example, a church could say the lobby is a public space, but the sanctuary is a private invitation only space. We could say the lobby here is a public space, but as soon as you cross that threshold into the wing, that's a private space. Because just like any law enforcement officer, they can't just bust into your private business, right? They have to have a search warrant in order to do so. So there is a way to push back, but unfortunately that policy has since gone away. The second thing is, oh, thank you, Sergio. National Immigration Forum says there's as many as 3.6 million dreamers residing in the United States. Only a minor of the dreamer population, approximately 530,000 dreamers, are currently protected. So that's where the 500,000 comes from. But more people could be eligible if the program was open. Thanks, Sergio. Another thing that happened this week is the refugee resettlement program has been suspended. This was a shock to me personally, because the refugee program is probably the most secure immigration program we have, right? The United Nations vets people before they even come here, and then they get vetted when they get here too. So the fact that that whole thing is paused is pretty heartbreaking. I was talking to someone last night from Kentucky Refugee Ministries. They had an arrival of a refugee family that was supposed to come today, and their flight was canceled. And now they're not coming anymore. And the Trump administration said they're going to renew the like the fiscal impact of the program. Like basically, is it worth the money that they're spending to help dangerous people resettle here? Vulnerable people, really. Also, they essentially ended the asylum program. I was reading about an executive order this morning, which I also didn't notice until this morning, was that like right now you can come to the border and the border patrol person will ask you if you're afraid. Well, first, during the Biden administration, they said that Border Patrol can't ask. The immigrant has to know to say that they're afraid. So that was the first barrier. And now we're even further on that. The executive order, I need to link to the orders exactly because I have not read the order. So I apologize if I'm misinterpreting this, but it's my understanding now that you can't even come to the border and say you're afraid. You have to say you're afraid before you come to the border. So it's super complicated and makes it even harder for vulnerable people to understand the process. And also there was an app that the Biden administration put together called CBP-1, Customs and Border Patrol 1. And it was to manage appointments to talk to asylum seekers because there were so many people needing help. That app went dark. They canceled the app. And so people who had been waiting for an interview for months got the news that they weren't going to have their interviews this week. Another program that that happened under the Trump administration and slowly was ended during the Biden administration has returned, called Remain in Mexico. You know how I said asylum seekers, if they pass their interview, they're allowed to go into the country and live with their family while their case goes on? No, not anymore. They have to remain in Mexico while their case is processed. So if you're lucky enough to qualify, you have to live in Mexico, which a lot of asylum seekers aren't even Mexican. So they have to live in another country while the process happens in Ohio. The last thing on this slide is funding to sanctuary cities. If a city has a sanctuary city designation, there's an executive order says that they should no longer get federal money. Cincinnati is technically on paper a sanctuary city, but I would argue that we never were and that it was a political stunt. And the reason why I say we never were is because it really only means something if the entity that says they're a sanctuary runs the jail, and we don't run our jail. Hamilton County runs the jail. So the city of Cincinnati, as a sanctuary city, you know, that says that their police officers won't cooperate with they won't enforce immigration laws. Because that's the federal immigration police, not the local police to enforce immigration laws. But we may be targeted because on paper, it says sanctuary. And the thing I wasn't going to get into, but we talked about a lot last night is our mayor was quoted in the Inquirer last week saying that they would cooperate with immigration if they came. So that's really disheartening given the stance that we're supposed to be a sanctuary city, but he basically just welcomed them into the city. And so sanctuary cities is a interesting topic because there's not much legal ground behind it because it kind of was a political thing. So we'll see what happens with that. I'm going to pause and I have another slide of horrible things that have happened this week. I'm going to pause for questions. Yes.
On this suspended refugee resettlement program, our church and another church sponsors a refugee. And they are, you know, within the church basement or whatever. What's their status?
If they're still here, they're still refugees. Yeah, this is arrivals. They're suspended arrivals.
Oh, okay, they're
Yeah.
just suspended arrivals.
Yes.
So they're fine.
Yes, if people are already here, they should be fine. Questions on Zoom about these 5 things that I talked about? What'd you say?
It's hard to believe it.
I know, it's been a hard week. I've cried several times. I have 2 therapy sessions scheduled with my therapist this week.
These are not your, even these, you know, various things that are meant to be obeyed by the national government to be smudged by the various orders by the administration to just go in and round people up.
Well, so to summarize your statement, our people are, with all of these orders that are coming out, is that just going to empower ICE to round people up? Yes. Yes. If you are undocumented in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could be detained. Yes. One of the executive orders that's not on here is that under the Biden administration, they had what was called tiered enforcement. So ICE would look for specific people with like violent felonies. They would be like the top focuses of their investigations and their resources. And then there would be another tier of like non-violent felonies, and there would be another tier of like a bunch of misdemeanors. And so ICE like was using their energy in a different way, and now those tiers have gone away, and anyone who's undocumented is a target. Let's talk about this next set of policies. There was an executive order that ended some parole programs, and mentioned TPS, but TPS has to be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. So my anticipation is, because it's a temporary protected status, they look at the conditions in that country every few years to see if it's stable or not. And I'm imagining our government will say it's stable and they will end the program and end the protection for people with TPS. Parole is another tool that the Biden administration used because there were so many people from Honduras, El Salvador, like in Central America, that he let them in at the border. And like they had special permission to be here and it was called parole. But that program has also ended. That program ended this week. Mandatory detention and criminalization. I kind of talked about this with the Laken Riley Act. But instead of if you have an immigration case, instead of being allowed to go into the community or allowed to work or go about your day, detention is now mandatory. And so they sometimes undocumented people, when they are in contact with ICE, they wear ankle monitors or have a tracking app on their phone. So they're like out in the community, but ICE still knows where they are. And they're allowed to live because they're not violent threats. That is also ended. Last night, someone was telling me they went to their check-in with ICE. So ICE knows about them and they went to their check-in and they were detained at their check-in. And that happened a lot during the Trump administration. So people who are just trying to follow the rules are also being detained. There is also a renewed effort to get local law enforcement engaged in immigration law enforcement. The biggest example of this is the Butler County Jail. For many, many years, Sheriff Jones had a tool called 287G. It's a contract with ICE. And so his officers were deputized kind of like as immigration officers and could write detention orders. And so they had a whole wing of their jail just for immigration detention. Thankfully, due to the work of advocates, and some of you in this room may have participated in some of those actions and protests, there was a lawsuit that said that the conditions within the jail were abhorrent and immigrants were being treated poorly. So Sheriff Jones lost his contract. Well, if you've been watching the news, he has been all around the news, excited that he thinks he's going to get his contract back. And it's very likely that he will. And there are advocates trying to push against that and to try to stop it. But there was an executive order this week to try to encourage and incentivize local law enforcement to do the federal government's job. There also was a national emergency declared at the border. And when a national emergency is declared, that gives the government power to send more money and resources and kind of bend some of the rules to address whatever the emergency is. So apparently our border is an emergency. And he also is deploying military down to the border. Another thing they did was classify drug cartels as terrorist groups, which on the surface doesn't seem that controversial, but it's basically racial profiling. You know, for example, a Central American country like Colombia, that's known to have connections with certain drug trafficking rings. They could profile you if you're from Colombia. That's just an example. So it's a profiling executive order. And the last thing, there's so many. I didn't put them all on here. There was at least 20 executive orders that had to do with immigration since Monday. The last one that happened is about birthright citizenship, which I mentioned earlier. You can get citizenship if you're born on U.S. soil. So that means a family who are an undocumented couple could have a baby in the United States and they would get citizenship. So because of that, Trump is trying to end it. And so he put an order and to end birthright citizenship, but it's not that easy. The reason it's not that easy is all of these immigration laws came out of Congress except for that one. That one's in the Constitution. The Constitution says if you're born on U.S. soil, you are a citizen. So in order to get rid of the 14th Amendment, that's what falls under, that's the amendment that guarantees that. In order to get rid of that, states have to ratify the amendment, and there has to be a majority of states that do that, certain threshold. So it's not something that he can just do with the stroke of his pen. However, we are concerned that some of the courts that are going to hear this case are controlled by one party and are fans of his, and might try to circumvent the process. So right now, this is something that is not, it's not instantaneous. It's going to be a long, drawn out legal battle, because it's in the Constitution. Yes, let's take questions on this batch of bad stuff. Yes. Yeah, the question was the story about the person with the ankle monitor that went into their check-in. Was that here? Yes, it was here. That the ICE office is in Blue Ash. Yeah. Yep, it's a nondescript. There's no signs out front. Yeah. Yes. I do. I have to look it up. Yeah. Do you want to know? You can email me afterwards. Question was, do we know where the Blue Ash office is? And the answer is yes. Any questions on Zoom?
The assumption has been that many of the heads of households in mixed households where the kids are all legal, rather than to wait passively for all this to fall on them, will disappear into the homeless population. The homeless shelter community is today issuing some instructions to shelter operators that track what you had suggested earlier. That is to say that they would declare in that the lobbies were public spaces and that the shelter themselves were not. But have you got any particular feedback on that? We think that there may be a huge influx of adult homeless people disappearing into the bushes as a result of all this.
I do expect people to what we call go back in the shadows. There already have people that have not been going to their English language classes. They've been afraid to show up. I talked to a school before Christmas break because they were worried that their students wouldn't come back. And what I said to the students is, this is probably one of the safest places for you, because if something happens to you or your family, we won't know because you won't be here, right? If you're at school and something happens to your family, people are watching, people are ready to help. And so we tried to convince those young people to come back to school, but there is a lot of fear. And I saw that memo, Steve, about shelters, and I'm glad that they're doing that. Let me talk about what you can do in the last 5 minutes, because all is not lost. There's a lot of great work happening. I mentioned there was a meeting last night with over 100 people. The Immigrant Dignity Coalition has put together some teams for rapid response. And these teams came out of a toolkit from Eastern Tennessee, because Eastern Tennessee had a major workplace raid during the first Trump administration and said, these are the things that are needed to protect your community. So you can see on the screen, we have grassroots organizing. That group is in charge of working with the immigrant community itself to prepare. There are documents and things that immigrants can do to prepare. For example, if a breadwinner is taken and someone needs to take custody of a child, there's a power of attorney form that they could prepare. Also to gather birth certificates and marriage licenses and property titles. That's something that the grassroots organizing group is doing, and also trying to empower them to use their voices and to speak out against this injustice, because they have power too. They have power too. The second one is humanitarian services. That is especially if there's a large immigration raid or action, to make sure we have a space where families can meet, to make sure we have donations, to make sure the nonprofits know if they can take more clients. So humanitarian services is very busy. Legal services just put out I got the copy last night of their new family preparedness packet. They've been working on that resource. They are also, there's also an email that's been set up for communities that want Know Your Rights presentations. So they can request, immigrant communities can request Know Your Rights presentations through the legal services team. Policy and advocacy have been watching what's going on and are pushing back, writing letters and starting petitions and all that good stuff. The volunteer coordination team is probably our weakest one. We need more help with that. And that is to take good people like you who have resources and time and energy to like log what you have available. And so that way you can be called upon in the time of need. Like I've got people who are willing to give up their extra bedroom to house people. And then lastly is communications and media. And this is to really push back about against the narrative that all immigrants are dangerous and taking our resources, because people on both sides of the aisle, including our elected officials here in Cincinnati, have said some pretty heinous things about our immigrant community, and we need to push back. The teams meet in between coalition meetings. And so then at coalition meetings there's a report back. So for those of you in the room, the report from last night is on the table if you want to see what the teams have been up to. There's also contact information for all the team leads in those reports. If you would like that report and you're on Zoom, please send me an email. I don't want those to be too public, but if you're interested in getting involved and want to know who else is involved, that's the place to go. Also on the sign-in sheet for today, there is a column that says if you want to join a rapid response team to write which one you want to join. So you're welcome to do that as you go out the door today. So it is almost 1 o'clock, which was our end time. I want to give you my contact information. And this is a QR code if you want to join our email list, or you can go to ignitepeace.org to stay in touch with us about what's going on. And I'm happy to take any final questions in the last couple of minutes, but that's what I've prepared for you today. Thank you. Yes, question over here.
Concern. They're talking about nonprofits that are doing this work. I mean, how are people talking about that?
Yes, so at the end of last year, there was a bill passed in the House of Representatives that basically said the president could shut down any nonprofit he didn't like, essentially. That bill did not make it through both houses by the end of the session, but I do expect that bill to come back. But yes, there also is a lot of attention on nonprofits that are helping immigrants. I feel very at risk personally coordinating all of this. And so it's calculated risk, right? We can't hide and do nothing because people need us, right? So we need to be brave and take calculated risks. For example, last night, the coalition meeting, we talked about security of our meetings because our meetings are pretty open. And so we could have infiltrators or people wanting to harm us come to those meetings. So we talked about security precautions. And I think every nonprofit professional should. What could they do to me? So during the Springfield stuff, the activists that were speaking out, some of them got doxxed or swatted, which means that someone called the police and said that so-and-so did something heinous, and then SWAT busted down their door at 2 a.m. So there's things that could still, there's ways that people who don't like me could intimidate me. Yeah. Yeah. And with the rise of extremism, I wouldn't put violence out of the picture. Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard time. Yes, question. Oh, great. Wish I would have known that. Hey.
I would love.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I think, just hearing me, I mean, I know I have a good friend who's other.
Mm-hmm.
Just hearing, those human stories of people who have been here for a long time.
Yes.
All of a sudden, now they feel like this. So we would really like to work with you.
Yeah.
Share with you guys,
Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Yes. Because even allies and people are at risk. So to summarize, for those of you on Zoom, we have a photographer and journalist. Sure. Both two photographers from the Inquirer in the room. Talking about how they want to tell these human stories to make it real for the public. It's very challenging because I also am not a fan of exploiting people's trauma and showing those vulnerable moments where people are just at their lowest. And so I think telling positive stories about contributions and about relationships and people that we know. For example, one of my previous coworkers had DACA, and I took him out to a bar trivia night with my friends, and we all had a good time. They didn't know he had DACA, whatever. Then a couple weeks later, when the DACA program was in the news, I mentioned to them, I said, hey, do you remember so-and-so? He has DACA. And their minds were blown because they were like, really? He seems like a great guy. And I was like, of course he's a great guy. And so it's telling these stories are really tricky right now. The communications team is really trying to put together a strategy to help push the public narrative because there really aren't a lot of loud people, elected officials even, that are standing up for vulnerable people right now. Yeah.
I think the story that we read.
Yeah.
So I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. If you write a piece about today, let me know and I can send you. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, good. Good. Well, I appreciate you doing that. Someone from the Inquirer came to our November coalition meeting and offered, I offered to do a version of this for the editorial board.
Oh, it would be.
I would be more than happy to do that.
But yeah, I will let them know.
Yeah. I'd be more than happy to talk to the newsroom. Also, it looks on Zoom, we have someone from Link NKY doing a story on the Kentucky side of the river. So yes, please reach out if you want to work together. I will say that we are in emergency mode right now, so I'm kind of triaging the requests that I'm getting. And so it might take me a minute or two to get back to you. And so don't feel free to bug me if it's urgent. But yeah, I want to respect everyone's time and officially close the forum. But thank you all for coming. I hope you stay connected. I hope you stay positive, and know that we need you right now. So thank you. I'll stick around and talk for those of you in the room, but I am going to end the Zoom meeting. So
Thanks so much, Samantha.